I think the history of NCAT really shows the history of our agriculture system over the last 50 years. So next year will be our 50th year as a national nonprofit. It started initially whenever the energy crisis was happening. We were working with rural communities who were having their electricity shut off in just droves. And we were like, well, how can we both maintain resources and support these communities into a more resilient community? So one of my coworkers, he knew ATRA or NCAT from way back then. His community in Texas had their electricity shut off, and NCAT came and helped them all transition to solar power. It wasn't a huge project, but it just helped them to get through that summer whenever there was almost no one. And I know in my town in Alexandria, Louisiana, about a quarter of our population had their electricity shut off after the drought and heat waves of 2023. It's still a maintaining issue. So that was one of the ways we started, and we just continued down that path of sustainable resource management, and that really led us into the farming community of working with farmers in those rural communities because they're such the heart and soul. And in the 1980s, big farming crisis happened, awful things, and I feel like we're in a repeat history in some ways, but those farmers, Congress was said, get big or get out. And ATRA once again stepped in, was like, whoa, we need these resources. Like, getting big also could come at a huge cost to our communities, our rural communities, and our land and soil, and losing that soil. And so we were lucky enough to be funded in that time period under rural development. So as USDA was focusing more on get big, rural development was really helping maintain those small scale sustainable farms. And so SARE and ATRA were both funded at that moment. And again, we really were honed into that resource management, conservation, and the word we've used since then is sustainable agriculture. There's been trending words on and off that everyone dabbles in, all that, but we really stay with that sustainable agriculture. And throughout the 90s, whenever the organic label was being made, before that there was so many labels, and the organic label took away some of the chaos for farmers deciding that, really giving them the power of marketing. And it's really interesting because right now we're kind of getting back to that kind of, there's so many options for farmers. And ATRA really had its foot in the soil with its actual TA professionals. A lot of us are farmers that have both worked in the U.S. A huge amount of Peace Corps and AmeriCorps members actually make up our farming staff. Just people really dedicated to service to farmers and different resources that help them no matter where they're at in their farming journey. And so in the 90s and 2000s, we really found our speed in our phone calls and creating publications to help just information get out to everyday farmers. At that time, Extension was still figuring out what sustainable agriculture looked like from a university perspective. So you would call them and you'd be like, how can I not spray a dangerous chemical on my backyard tomatoes as a farmer or something like that? And they were still figuring out how they were responding to that. And ATRA, because it was national, working both in California and Massachusetts and Mississippi, right? Like, we were like, well, we don't have the solution perfect for Mississippi, but we know what these sustainable farmers are doing in California and Montana. And so we were able to pool this national resources of really thinking instead of siloed in our state, thinking at a larger scale of what sustainable means for our country and for the resources we have as the United States. And so in the 2010s, as we all know, as the food system changed, the local food hit off. Every farmer's market, every town had a farmer's market, and they were thriving and pumping, and it was such a wonderful time. And once again, we were like, okay, so what's the gap? Extension at this point had really found it come into its own, as well as like the new generation of Extension was coming in, and they knew more about sustainable agriculture. And so we, at that moment, started advocating for veterans that had been coming home after our war on terrorism and all that. And in 2013, the USDA, with a cooperative agreement with us and the Farmer Veteran Coalition, started their actual earmarking funds for veterans. So we were there right at the front, and Arm to Farm has taken place in I think 40 states now, where we've actually worked with veteran farmers, created a community and a week-long program where they're getting business skills and actually seeing farms. And so that was one of our to this day, one of our main cornerstone programs is working with veterans. And in 2014, that next year, we really found our way into another space, which was Latino farming conferences. And working with the Latino population in California was the first year we hosted a conference that was solely for farmers of Hispanic and Latino descent, and was Spanish speaking and all these elements. And in 2018, we expanded that to Texas, and really started creating our resources not just in English but in Spanish as well, recognizing the shift of our farming population. And our food supply was not just solely English speakers but Spanish speakers, and really the people really tending to the land oftentimes at farms. Even if you have someone at a higher level speaking English, your staff and workers are oftentimes not native English speakers. So getting those technical words, it's still hard for our translation crew, y'all. They're like, this word does not translate well into Spanish. And so there's all these fascinating things that happen because of that. So we have Spanish speaking technical assistance providers that are able to hop on a call at any moment when someone who's Spanish speaking calls us. And 2015, our Gulf state, our South, came into its own as well, where we started focusing on what we called soil for water. Thinking about how many droughts, how many floods, all that we've had. And we know that high organic matter is important for infiltration and soil retention, both for flooding and droughts. But in the South, that's really hard to build, even 1% organic matter, y'all. It is, the Midwest, they just brag about it. And we're just the temperature never allows us to, because the microbes are always eating. And so even though originally we can look back and say, this soil used to be 6% organic matter, how do we actually build that organic matter up is really such a huge question that we're continuing to fill. How do we prevent our land after, in the 80s and 90s, they were just leveling farmland all over the place so you could better furrow irrigate. And now all these swells are non-existent, and so we have water all over. That's why I'm like, oh, look, if you can stop erosion, stop our soil from going to our water, which then goes into the Mississippi, and all these elements, then that's a huge win for farmers, for our rivers, for our resource management, for our fisher people. And so it really is such a huge thought process, but you can get really big and cerebral, but you can also get really small. And planting a tree, we know in cities they plant trees because it helps flooding and it helps infiltration instead of the stormwater taking it all. What if we planted a tree in our swells, in our low points in our farm? What would that do to help not only bring water up during droughts, but also infiltrate it down into our aquifers? Whenever we're seeing right now our aquifers are draining even faster than ever because of the industries and things like that. And so there's a lot of partnerships that go into that between cities and farmers. And so we're still looking at how that works for really practical things. So we mentioned precision irrigation with drip, and sometimes that means really talking about but increasing carbon, not just organic matter. And so what does that look like with biochar and the policies that go along with that? And you get into what that actually means for y'all right now. We have workshops and resources coming out for women focused in farming and agriculture. That started in 2019, and in 2020 we also started focusing even more on solar farms and actual agriculture farms and what that looks like as well, gathering resources from all continental states about how you can graze under solar panels or grow flowers underneath those solar panels as well, or put solar panels on top of a lake so it decreases the amount of evaporation that's happening from your pond. So all these elements, ATRA is finding where the gaps are in agriculture and trying to really connect the high-level research with what it actually means for everyday farmers. So you can call us. We still have a hotline and still have a person on that line out all the time. We have emails and chat forms that you can get on as well and talk to someone who is an agriculture professional. And again, 90% of our folks are farmers themselves. They have experience and they know that's maybe not actually reasonable for a person to do as a farmer, to completely change your system or whatever it is. They really have practical experience. I work in Louisiana, Mississippi, and I have 10 years of farming experience behind that and education in what it actually means to be an organic farmer in the South. And not only that, the marketing that goes with those elements, as well as food safety here, it's also complex for someone who's not in the actual business. And so it really is helpful that we have such experienced staff members across the entire United States. So we have our Arm to Farm, we have Women Livestock Land, we have Latino farming conferences and resource building, we have 400 plus publications about agriculture and farming, from the best way to calculate your grazing to one that I really love, our biorational database. It really talks about what options you have for pest management and grazing, and we have an expert in pest management who updates all the chemicals that are allowed under the organic label. So you can go in and be like, cucumber beetles, what do I do? And not only could you potentially come across our cucumber beetle publication that talks about the best way to just like prevent them by managing your soil, managing where they're laying eggs, you also will get into what you can spray whenever you get to that point in your IPM where you're like, all right, am I sanitizing things? Am I preventing the eggs from being laid? Am I preventing the spread? Okay, I'm at the point where I got to spray for this. What is actually allowable and is really short term, so that it dissipates before my bees come the next day. And so so those are all the types of things you can find on our website. We're in the midst of like a rebranding for our 50th, y'all. I'm really excited. I know, right? And it's good because one of our things is that it's kind of hard to search on our website, so it's really going to improve our search functions, and so that's really exciting. And so I have more information. I had thought maybe I could talk about a little bit more about pest management if you wanted, but is there any questions y'all have about ADRA? Yes, ma'am.
You mentioned solar panels. This a specific program, or would you just call them or chat with someone to kind of discuss what to do? Because I'm personally looking into hydroponics, and so I kind of got that part squared away, but then the whole thought process of, okay, solar panel power, what to do, it's a little scared.
Yeah, because if you have a building for it, no, okay.
So this would be outside.
You're doing hydroponics outside. Ooh.
I know.
Yeah, I love it. You're like still get real vitamin D and stuff.
Yes.
And yeah. So with that, we can really look at helping you find the right resources in your county, because that's one of the ways they have certain like elements of tax breaks and things like that to help you just fund the actual establishment of that. Okay. And what is Mississippi's like rules as far as long-term storage and feeding into the grid? Because in some states you could have like an off-grid system very easily. In other places they want you to be in the grid.
You all would help me.
Yeah, and again with that, if you end up going with an equip to help you fund that as well, like helping you navigate the equip system. I know we could help. You'd be doing it through NRCS, so they would be helping you as well. And so finding your NRCS agent, that would be helpful as well. But equip, we'll find out once the office is reopened.
And do you have like, I guess I can Google the name, but do you have any card information?
Yeah, I have some cards. I'll get you one after this. Yeah. So solar panels is like, again, there's a lot of places happening with solar panels, and I know farmers and communities are worried about what that does to the land. And so we want to make sure that people know that there's options, that you don't have to lose it for agricultural land in a time whenever we're losing so much land, agricultural land. Like, we can find a middle way here to have sustainable energy and goats as well.
Yeah. Thank you.
Yeah. We show up for each other, but mostly we're trying to show up for our farmers, and by doing that, it gets into a bigger system.